When I first started working as a doctor, I used to overthink a lot. And even in Cambridge, back at med school, I used to overthink whether I was studying the right way or whether I was spending time with the right people. And after a lot of research, I developed this model for why we overthink and how to actually get out of our heads and start making progress. This is not going to be like all the other fluffy advice that you get from everyone else online. This is the science-based way to stop overthinking forever. And I'm going to give you 3 no BS practical tips that you can do today to get out of your head and start doing things. So overthinking can be split into 2 types. Type 1 is when you're overthinking about the past, and that's more related to the mechanism of depression. And then type 2 is where you're overthinking about the future, which is more related to the mechanism of anxiety. And before you say anything, I'm not diagnosing you with anything, but even if you don't have these clinical diagnoses, you still have the mechanisms in your brain, the same symptoms in your brain that allow you to have these feelings. The overall function of your brain is to keep you alive. And so the function of overthinking is to allow you to avoid pain and keep you safe. All right, so type 1, when you're overthinking about the past, is because some event is still causing you pain in the present. Like, you know, if you have a memory or if you have something that still comes to your mind, even if it was years in the past or it happened a long time ago, for some reason it's still causing you pain right now. It's still making you sad because something hurt you back then. And so you think about it. You think about it even though it's done, right? Why is that useful? The reason why that's useful is because if you are thinking about this scenario, what your brain is trying to do is trying to organize this event into, you know, discrete data points that I can understand. Right now, like actually when it happened, it's this massive cloud of like this thing that happened and you're not really sure how it happened or why it happened, but you know it hurt you. And so your brain is trying to organize this event such that it can find out, you know, what was that one bit of it that actually caused you pain, right? And the reason why it wants to organize it, it wants you to think about all the scenarios, who did what, why this happened, all the other potential simulated scenarios of why things could have been, is because it wants to find out what point hurt you, and then you can take actions in the future to avoid it and stay away from this pain. If you don't understand why this event hurt you, you have no ability to avoid it in the future, right? You are out of control, and so you are going to stay upset. You're going to stay thinking about it because your brain wants you to be prepared. Your brain wants you to think about all of the threats that could have occurred, and a lot of those threats are the threats that you've seen in the past. And so the only way to actually feel happy in the present right now and not keep thinking about those past events that hurt you is to understand why specifically those things hurt you and what specifically you need to do to avoid it. And the second type is when you are expecting some sort of pain in the future, right? You don't know that some event is going to happen, and so you're expecting some sort of pain, and that's why you are sad in the present. But the function of the anxiety or the overthinking that you have about this future event is so you can organize this event in the same way, right? The point of thinking is to think about all the possible scenarios and all the possible perspectives that you can get on this scenario that can allow you to organize it so that you can find out, oh, okay, this is the point in which that would get painful. And so then in the present, I can act in a different way to avoid that part of this event and minimize pain. So in a direct way, this could be that you expect that maybe your ex is going to be at this party that you're going to go to, right? And so of course, the reason why you expect pain is because the last time you saw this person, it caused you pain, right? And so what you do is you overthink and you try to organize all of the things about that event. Say, all right, how do I minimize this thing? And that might be avoiding them. It's probably not a good idea, but your mind might think, all right, I could avoid them. I could, you know, go speak to them with one of my friends next to me so it's less bad. And then eventually the point of the overthinking is to find you a series of events that minimizes pain. And that's what you do, right? And this could also be indirectly, where instead of it being like a direct thing that you know that there's an event happening, it could be you overthinking a choice, right? What job you do, who you go on a date with, right? Because what you're trying to do is optimize for the right choice. But optimizing for the right choice is really optimizing for the minimal amount of pain. And so what you're doing is you might be like, okay, I could have these 3 choices or these 4 or 5 choices, and one of them is going to cause me the most pain, and you anticipate that pain, and so that's why you overthink about your choice. And then you try to calculate a point in which this is the best thing to do, this is how I avoid all the pain, and then you, in theory, are meant to act and then minimize pain in the future. So fundamentally, overthinking is to put your brain in overdrive to think and simulate all of the other options and all of the other perspectives from lots of different people and lots of different ways, and what if this happened, what if this happened, to calculate the best way to avoid pain in the future. All right, so the no BS advice, if you have this type 1 overthinking, where you're overthinking about the past, is that what is happening in your brain is that there is some painful event that happened that is still painful to this day because your brain is still scared that you haven't understood it well enough to avoid it in the future. And so what you need to do is you need to help this arrow happen, right? You need to help yourself understand and organize that event and what caused you the pain so you can have an action plan for how you're going to avoid in the future. So some people will have a painful event that's like they went through a breakup, and what they do, instead of overthinking and specifically organizing this thing, what they do is, oh, I'm just never going to get in a relationship again, which is obviously stupid. What you need to do is help yourself understand specifically this situation. And the best way to do that is actually helping yourself to think and not get into cycles of thought, think logically through a logical path that gets you to an action plan, and getting alternative perspectives. And so the way that I would help to do this is to journal and talk with other people. If you are journaling, you're basically thinking. You write down on a piece of paper logical step events and why things happen and why they didn't. And when things are more complicated, right? Nowadays, things are way more complicated than they were back in hunter-gatherer times. It wasn't very complicated about why you got hurt. It was obvious. But now we have lots of complicated social dynamics, and so we need a way of keeping track of our thoughts in a logical way and organizing them such that we understand what happened. When you are trying to think about things in your head, if it's too complicated, you just go round and round in circles, and that's not helpful. And so write in a journal what happened, why it happened, and then try to get a logical pathway of why you were hurt. What specifically did you do wrong? What did other people do wrong? And then you can find out what you can do differently, right? So that's the first thing. And the second thing is to talk with other people. This is why therapy works. This is why therapy works, is because somebody helps you to organize the previous events that hurt you, the previous traumatic events, and then you find a way of organizing your life and organizing your behavior such that you can avoid that in the future. That's the only reason why your brain is going to feel safe afterwards. That's why you feel better, is because you know that you can avoid it in the future. So what you need to do is talk with other people, talk with a professional, talk with somebody that is going to help you to understand these events that happen in your life such that you can make the actions to be happy and feel safe in the present. And then if you have type 2 overthinking, where you're thinking about the future, and especially if you're overthinking about choices that you need to make, this is the most common I've seen, that you need to think about this arrow, right? You need to think about how you are going to, in theory, calculate what the best thing to do, how to avoid the most pain. Now, really, I'm going to be honest with you. I'm a scientist. I care about logic and calculating using data that we have to produce the optimal output, right? But in most scenarios nowadays, that's not possible anymore, right? You cannot calculate the optimal pathway of your life. You can't calculate the optimal choice because you can't calculate the ripple effect of each choice that you've made, right? A decision that you've made before that might have been a mistake back then, you'll be grateful for it now because it taught you many other things. And so you can't say what the optimal choice is anymore. Things are too complicated to calculate anymore. We have too many things going on, right? Back in the day, your brain was just supposed to calculate what you do the next day or the next week, where you're going to get food from. You already knew who you were going to talk to, you and tribe. You didn't have to calculate 50 years down the line about what job you were supposed to do because you weren't living 50 years. You have to realize that the more that you project into the future, the more that you try to model complicated things in your mind, the less relevant data you have to make those conclusions. And so therefore, with this, you need to realize something. You can't calculate it. You have to accept the fact that you cannot calculate the optimal choice in your life. And you need to realize that probably with as much data as you have now, you are not from the future. You don't know what's going to happen. You're probably going to get hurt at some point or another. But you have to realize that even though you can't calculate it, you're going to be fine. You have to admit to yourself that you can't predict from now what is going to be optimal in 5, 10, 20 years time. And therefore, you can't calculate things, and you have to just you have to realize that there's no point in doing this anymore. And then the most important thing that you need to know about overthinking for both of these scenarios is that overthinking has a purpose in that it wants to understand the model of the world in either the past or the future, and then change your actions to minimize pain in the future. And so you can overthink all you want, but there is no point in overthinking to try and optimize things if you don't couple that with action. Here, you need to actively process your thoughts and talk to people, and then actively change your behavior to make sure that you don't get hurt again. Here, you need to actively, instead of calculating, you need to do things, because doing things is the only way to get real data in real time to then maybe have a better model of the world to calculate, at least in a more accurate way, how to reduce pain and actually make the best decision. Overthinking is not a bug in your mind. It is a feature of the software that is only useful if you take relevant action. You need to stop thinking and start doing things. Stop thinking and start doing. If you do things in the present, you can make your past feel less bad. If you do things in the present, you can make your future feel less bad. You do not need to overcomplicate it. Pick one thing. Do one thing and actually execute it, and your life will be better for it. Do these 3 things if you want to never overthink again. I know that overthinking is incredibly draining, and if you are constantly feeling tired, then click this video on screen where I explain exactly why you are feeling tired all the time and how to fix it permanently.